When an Count arrives to collect a debt, he expects ledgers and legal documents. He does not expect to find his heart irrevocably altered by a woman who possesses nothing but dignity and a small sewing room. Gideon, Count of Wrenford, came for what was owed. Instead, he discovered something far more valuable and infinitely more dangerous to a man sworn to duty over desire. This is a story of secrets hidden in account books, of tender glances exchanged over columns of numbers, of a widow who refuses to surrender, and an Count who learns that the greatest risk is not financial ruin, but a life lived without love. In the grand drawing rooms of Regency, England, where reputation is currency and scandal is ruin, two souls will gamble everything on a love that society cannot comprehend. Will you join us for this journey? Subscribe to our channel so you never miss another sweeping tale of passion and courage, and tell us in the comments what you love most about historical romances. Chapter 1. The spring rain had finally ceased when the carriage arrived. Vivian Hartley heard the wheels crunching on the gravel path before she saw the gleaming black lacquer through her cottage window, and her hands stilled on the ledger she had been reviewing for the third time that morning. She knew what this visit meant. The debt collectors had been patient for 6 months following Thomas's death, but patience, like everything else of value, eventually runs its course. She set down her pen with deliberate care and smoothed the front of her dove-grey morning dress. The fabric was beginning to show wear at the cuffs, but she had mended it with such precision that only the most discerning eye would notice. Precision had become her religion in the months since Thomas left her with nothing but debts, a cottage, and the small sewing room where she now earned enough to keep bread on her table. The knock, when it came, was firm but not aggressive. Vivian opened the door herself, having dismissed her single maid an hour countier. No need for witnesses to her humiliation. The man standing on her threshold was not what she expected. Debt collectors, in her limited experience, were squat men with ledgers and calculating eyes. This man was tall, easily over 6 feet, with shoulders that filled his expertly tailored coat. His dark brown hair was slightly disheveled from the wind, and his eyes were a remarkable shade of grey that seemed to assess everything in a single glance. He was perhaps 35, and he carried himself with the unconscious authority of someone accustomed to deference. Mrs. Hartley. His voice was deep, cultured, with an edge that suggested he was not a man who enjoyed the errand that brought him here. I am she. Gideon Ashworth, Count of Wrenford. He did not extend his hand, which Vivian found oddly respectful. I believe you know why I am here. My late husband's debt to your estate. Yes, my lord, I have been expecting this visit. She stepped aside. Please come in. Though I warn you, there is little here worth seizing. The cottage was small, but immaculately kept. Vivian led him into the front room, which served as both sitting area and the workspace where she conducted her sewing business. A large table dominated the space, currently covered with fabric samples and a dress she was altering for the vicar's wife. The morning light through the windows illuminated everything with brutal honesty. The worn carpet, the modest furniture, the single shelf of books that represented her only luxury. Gideon's gaze swept the room, and something flickered in his expression that Vivian could not quite identify. Pity. She hoped not. She could bear anything but pity. Your husband borrowed £2,000 from the Wrenford estate, he said, pulling a document from his coat. The debt was to be repaid over 5 years. He paid only the first 2 installments before his death. I am aware of the terms, my lord. Vivian remained standing, her hands clasped loosely before her. I am also aware that I cannot pay what is owed. This cottage and its contents represent the sum of my assets. If you wish to claim them in partial satisfaction of the debt, I will not contest it. I ask only for time to secure other lodging. Gideon looked at her with those penetrating grey eyes. Where will you go? I have a cousin in Yorkshire who might take me in. Or I can seek a position as a companion. I have some education and adequate references. To be a drudge to some cantankerous widow? To fade into invisibility in someone else's home? There was an unexpected heat in his words. Forgive my bluntness, Mrs. Hartley, but you strike me as someone who would find such a fate intolerable. Vivian felt a flush rise to her cheeks. My tolerance, my lord, is irrelevant. One does what one must. Indeed. He walked to the window, his tall frame blocking the light. When he turned back, his expression had shifted into something calculating. "I did not come here today expecting to be impressed, Mrs. Hartley, but you have managed it nonetheless. This cottage is modest, but it is impeccably maintained. That work table suggests a thriving business. Hand these ledgers." He gestured to the account books stacked neatly on the side table. "You keep accounts?" "I do. My father was a solicitor's clerk. He taught me figures before I could properly read." "Interesting." Gideon picked up one of the ledgers, flipping through it with an expert eye. "Very interesting indeed. Tell me, Mrs. Hartley, do you know anything about estate management?" The question was so unexpected that Vivian blinked. Only what any woman of modest means must know to manage a household. "Why do you ask?" "Because I find myself in need of someone with a talent for accounts and the ability to detect irregularities." He set down the ledger and faced her fully. "Your husband's debt troubles me, Mrs. Hartley, not because of the money itself, but because of how it came to be." "I do not understand. £2,000 is a significant sum, but not extraordinary. What troubles me is that my former steward, a man named Cyrus Pritchard, arranged the loan. He also managed the repayment schedule, and he kept remarkably poor records of the entire transaction." Gideon's expression hardened. "I have reason to believe that Mr. Pritchard engineered several such debts in order to embezzle from the estate. Your husband may have been as much a victim as I." Vivian felt the room tilt slightly. "Are you suggesting Thomas did not actually borrow the full amount?" "I am suggesting that the paperwork is conveniently vague and that Pritchard left my employ rather suddenly 3 months ago, taking with him several years' worth of detailed account records." Gideon moved closer, and Vivian caught the scent of fine soap and something else, something warm and masculine that made her acutely aware of how long it had been since she stood this close to any man. "I am proposing a reprieve, Mrs. Hartley. Help me untangle this mess. If we can prove that Pritchard manipulated the debt, you may owe far less than you think, perhaps nothing at all. And if we cannot prove it, then you will still owe the debt, but I will give you time to establish your business more firmly before we discuss repayment terms." He paused. "I am not a monster, Mrs. Hartley, despite what my errand today might suggest. I have no interest in rendering you homeless." Vivian studied him, searching for the trap. Aristocrats did not offer kindness without expecting something in return, but his grey eyes held steady, and there was no hint of the predatory interest she had learned to recognize in men who thought a widow might be desperate enough to trade her virtue for security. "What exactly would this arrangement entail, my lord?" "You would come to Wrenford Hall 3 days each week to review the estate accounts. I would provide transportation and a modest stipend for your time. We would work together to trace the irregularities and build a case against Pritchard." He offered a slight smile. "I warn you, it will be tedious work. Account books and correspondence dating back 5 years. I am not afraid of tedious work, my lord." "No," he said softly. "I rather suspected you were not." And so, standing in her small cottage with the rain-washed sunlight streaming through the windows, Vivian Hartley made a decision that would alter the course of her life. She extended her hand in a gesture that was neither entirely proper nor entirely professional. "I accept your offer, Lord Wrenford." His hand closed around hers, large and warm and steady. The contact lasted a moment longer than strictly necessary, and when they stepped apart, something had shifted in the air between them, something neither of them was quite ready to name. Chapter 2. Wrenford Hall was everything Vivian's cottage was not: vast, imposing, filled with centuries of accumulated wealth and history. The first time the Count's carriage delivered her to the great house, she spent a full minute staring up at the Palladian facade before gathering the courage to climb the entrance steps. A butler who looked older than the building itself admitted her without expression and led her through a series of corridors to a library that could have housed half the books in England. Gideon was waiting there, coat discarded, shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows in a state of casual dishabille that no count should display to a woman not his wife. If he noticed her sharp intake of breath, he gave no sign. "Mrs. Hartley, excellent. I have laid out the account books from the past 5 years. I thought we might begin with the year your husband's loan was arranged and work both forward and backward from there. He gestured to a table where leather-bound ledgers were stacked in neat piles. I must warn you, Pritchard's handwriting is abominable. Then we shall simply have to persevere, my lord. They fell into a routine over the following weeks. Vivian arrived each Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday morning. A footman would show her to the library where Gideon would already be working, and they would spend hours bent over the account books, tracing payments and cross-referencing entries. The Count proved to have a sharp mind for numbers and an even sharper instinct for irregularities. More than once, it was his observation that led them to a discrepancy Vivian had missed. "Here," he said one morning in their third week, sliding a ledger across the table. "This entry from 4 years ago. What does it tell you?" Vivian studied the notation. "A payment to a Mr. Harrison for timber, £200. Now look at this." He produced another book, this one containing bills of sale. Harrison's invoice for the same date, £150. A £50 difference. Vivian felt a spark of excitement. Where did the extra money go? "An excellent question, and look here." Gideon's finger traced down the column. Similar discrepancies in 6 other transactions that year, all handled by Pritchard. Small amounts, never enough to raise immediate alarm, but over time, it adds up to significant theft. Vivian met his eyes, and the shared thrill of discovery arced between them like lightning. He was systematic. Clever. Too clever by half. Gideon's expression darkened. "I trusted that man with the financial well-being of everyone who depends on this estate. The tenant farmers, the household staff, the villagers who rely on Wrenford support. He betrayed all of them." There was genuine anger in his voice, but it was anger on behalf of others, not himself. Vivian found herself revising her assumptions about aristocratic self-absorption. They continued their work, and as spring deepened into county summer, something else began to grow alongside their investigation. Gideon started asking about her life, her late husband, her dreams beyond mere survival. Vivian, to her own surprise, answered honestly. She told him about Thomas, who had been kind but weak, whose gambling debts had mounted until the loan from Wrenford estate seemed like salvation rather than the trap it became. She told him about her father's death, about learning to sew, because it was one skill that could keep her fed. She even told him about the small pleasures she had discovered in her reduced circumstances, the satisfaction of a perfectly executed seam, the quiet pride of meeting her obligations, the freedom of owing nothing to anyone. In turn, Gideon spoke of the weight of his title, inherited at 23 when his father died. He described the endless obligations, the petitioners, the family expectations, the suffocating awareness that every decision affected hundreds of lives. He mentioned, almost in passing, that his mother and sisters were pressuring him to marry, preferably someone with impeccable connections who could restore the family's standing in society. "They have someone in mind, I take it." Vivian kept her tone carefully neutral. "Lady Constance Pemberton, daughter of the Marquis of Thornbury, beautiful, accomplished, entirely suitable." He said it with all the enthusiasm of a man describing a mathematical equation. "We have known each other since childhood." "She sounds lovely." "She is." Gideon looked up from his ledger, and his grey eyes held hers with uncomfortable intensity. "She is also boring beyond description and shares none of my interests, but she would make an appropriate Countess of Wrenford, which is apparently all that matters." Vivian dropped her gaze back to her work, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, and even more uncomfortable with the small, treacherous flutter of hope in her chest. She was a widow of no fortune and dubious prospects. The Count of Wrenford was so far above her station that even friendship was a precarious gift. To imagine more would be foolishness of the highest order, but her heart, it seemed, had not received that sensible message. The break in their routine came with an invitation to the midsummer fair in the village. Gideon suggested, with studied casualness, that Vivian might accompany him, as they could use the opportunity to speak with several merchants who had done business with the estate during Pritchard's tenure. "It would be useful to hear their perspective on the transactions," he said, "and you have been working so diligently that an afternoon in the sunshine seems well deserved." It was a flimsy excuse, and they both knew it. But Vivian found herself accepting, and on a brilliant Saturday afternoon, she walked through the village fair at the Count of Wrenford's side, acutely aware of every eye upon them. The fair was a riot of colour and noise, vendors selling ribbons and sweets, a juggler performing for a crowd of delighted children, musicians playing lively country dances. Gideon bought her lemonade and a meat pie. Had they paused to watch a puppet show that had them both laughing like schoolchildren? "I had forgotten," Gideon said quietly as they walked along the edge of the village green, "how pleasant it can be to simply enjoy a day without the weight of duty pressing down." "Your duty weighs heavily, my lord, always." He glanced at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "Until recently, at least. These past weeks working with you have been remarkably unburdened. It seems even accounting can be enjoyable with the right companion." Before Vivian could formulate a response to that dangerous statement, a commotion near one of the vendor stalls caught their attention. A well-dressed man was berating a young tenant farmer over some dispute about payment, his voice loud enough to draw a crowd. Gideon stiffened. "That is Pritchard." Vivian felt ice slide down her spine. She had not seen the former steward since beginning her work at Wrenford Hall, but she recognized the sharp features and calculating eyes from Gideon's descriptions. Cyrus Pritchard was a man of perhaps 50, handsome in a cold way, dressed with the kind of expensive taste that should have been beyond a steward's means. "We should speak with him," Vivian said quietly. "Test his reaction to seeing us together." "Are you certain? He may not react well." "I am certain." They approached together, and Pritchard's eyes widened fractionally when he saw them. The expression was quickly masked, but not before Vivian caught the flash of calculation and, unless she was mistaken, concern. "Lord Wrenford," Pritchard said smoothly, executing a bow that was correct but held a subtle note of insolence. "What an unexpected pleasure. And Mrs. Hartley, is it not? The late Mr. Hartley's widow." "You have a good memory, Mr. Pritchard," Vivian replied evenly, "though I confess I do not recall meeting you. I make it my business to remember the affairs of those connected to the Wrenford estate." His smile did not reach his eyes. "I trust you are well, madam. Managing your late husband's financial obligations must be a terrible burden." "Mrs. Hartley is assisting me with some accounting irregularities we have discovered," Gideon interjected, his voice cold enough to frost glass. "Irregularities dating from your tenure as steward. Perhaps you might call at Wrenford Hall to discuss them." Pritchard's expression flickered again, and this time Vivian was certain she saw fear beneath the smooth facade. "I am sure any irregularities are simple errors, my lord. Estate accounting can be complex, and sometimes entries are misconstrued by those not familiar with standard practices. Mrs. Hartley is quite familiar with standard practices. In fact, she is proving to be remarkably adept at identifying patterns of systematic embezzlement." The words hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Pritchard's face paled, then flushed with anger. "That is a serious accusation, my lord. I served your father and yourself with complete loyalty for 15 years. If you are suggesting, I am not suggesting anything. I am stating facts. We have documented evidence of falsified entries, inflated bills, and missing funds. Significant amounts, Mr. Pritchard. I will be presenting my findings to the magistrate. You will regret this." The smooth mask had cracked entirely now, revealing something ugly beneath. "Both of you. Mrs. Hartley, I wonder if you are aware that the cottage you occupy is subject to seizure if your husband's debt is called in full. As I recall, the deed has certain stipulations that could be invoked immediately." Vivian felt Gideon tense beside her. "Are you threatening her? Merely reminding the lady of her precarious position? And you? My lord might consider your own situation before making wild accusations. You are not without vulnerabilities. I understand Lady Constance's family takes a dim view of scandal. It would be unfortunate if your betrothal prospects were damaged by association with unsavory elements. There is no betrothal, and the only unsavory element here is a thief who grew fat on stolen money while tenant farmers struggled to pay their rents." Pritchard stepped closer, his voice dropping to a vicious whisper. "You have no idea what you are interfering with, Wrenford. Walk away from this. Take your pretty widow back to her sewing room and forget about account books. Otherwise, I promise you, the consequences will be severe for both of you." He turned and strode away before Gideon could respond, leaving them standing in the middle of the fair with a crowd of fascinated onlookers pretending not to stare. "Well," Vivian said, fighting to keep her voice steady, "I believe we have struck a nerve." Gideon's hand found hers, a brief, warm pressure. "He cannot touch you. I will not allow it." But as they walked back through the now whispering crowd, Vivian could not shake the feeling that Pritchard's threats were more than empty words. The man had the look of someone who would burn down the world rather than admit defeat, and she and Gideon had just put themselves directly in the path of the flames. Chapter 3. The invitation arrived 3 days after the confrontation at the fair. Heavy cream paper, elegant script, sealed with the Pemberton crest. Lady Constance's family was hosting a week-long house party at Wrenford Hall, and the Count's attendance was, of course, expected. The guest list included half the notable families in 3 counties. Gideon stared at the invitation as if it were a summons to his own execution. "My mother arranged this. She has been planning it for months, convinced that a romantic setting will push me toward the inevitable proposal." They were in the library, surrounded by the evidence they had been meticulously gathering. Weeks of work had produced a damning picture. Pritchard had embezzled N-County £8,000 over 5 years through a network of inflated bills, phantom purchases, and cleverly concealed arithmetic errors. More importantly, they had traced the original £2,000 loan to Thomas Hartley and discovered that the actual amount advanced was only £1,200. Pritchard had pocketed the difference and arranged the documentation to hide his theft. "Then you must attend and play your part," Vivian said, keeping her tone practical despite the sick feeling in her stomach. "Your family's expectations are not unreasonable. Lady Constance is not you." The words fell between them like stones dropped into still water. Vivian looked up from her ledger, and the expression on Gideon's face stole the breath from her lungs, raw, unguarded, desperate. "My lord, Gideon. When we are alone, it is Gideon. Please." He moved around the table, closing the distance between them with 2 long strides. "These weeks working beside you have been the happiest of my life. When I wake in the morning, I count the hours until you arrive. When you leave, the house feels empty. Tell me you do not feel it too. Tell me I'm imagining this connection, and I will step back and never speak of it again." Vivian's heart hammered against her ribs. Every ounce of self-preservation screamed at her to lie, to protect herself, to remember the impossible distance between an count and a widow with nothing. But when she looked into those grey eyes, honesty was the only possible response. "I feel it," she whispered. "God help me, I feel it." Gideon's hand rose to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "Then come to the house party, as my consultant on estate matters. It will raise eyebrows, but my grandmother will support the decision. And her word carries weight. Let me have you near for 1 week. Let me show you the life we might build together if I can find the courage to defy expectation. And Lady Constance? Will understand better than anyone. She is as trapped by duty as I am." His forehead touched hers, and they stood suspended in a moment that felt stolen from time itself. "Say yes, Vivian. Whatever comes after. Give me 1 week." She should refuse. She should protect her heart and her reputation and her hard-won independence. But the word that emerged was soft and irrevocable. Yes. The house party began on a Friday evening with a grand dinner that Vivian observed from the uncomfortable vantage point of neither servant nor true guest. She was housed in a comfortable room in the east wing, dressed in the best gown she could afford, a simple blue silk that was hopelessly outdated but at least well-fitted. The Dowager Countess, a formidable woman with sharp eyes and sharper wit, had taken her under wing with the pronouncement that anyone who could make sense of estate accounts deserved respect regardless of birth. Lady Constance Pemberton was exactly as beautiful as Gideon had described. Tall, blonde, with perfect posture, and a smile that never quite reached her cool blue eyes. She greeted Vivian with polite curiosity, and Gideon with the comfortable familiarity of old acquaintance. Watching them together at dinner, Vivian felt the full weight of her foolishness. They looked like a painting of aristocratic perfection, while she was a shadow at the edge of the frame. But then Gideon's eyes found hers across the length of the dining table, and the heat in that gaze made her forget every rational thought. The days fell into a pattern of exquisite torture. Mornings were spent in the library, ostensibly working on the accounts, but increasingly filled with stolen moments, hands brushing as they reached for the same document, conversations that had nothing to do with numbers and everything to do with dreams and fears and the terrifying possibility of happiness. Afternoons brought organized activities, archery, riding, elaborate picnics, where Vivian remained carefully in the background while Gideon performed his role as attentive host. Evenings were worst of all. Vivian would retreat to her room while the guests gathered for cards and music, and she would lie awake, imagining Gideon dancing with Lady Constance, walking with her in the moonlit gardens, perhaps even kissing her in some shadowed alcove. On the fourth night, she could bear it no longer. She slipped from her room near midnight, intending to walk in the gardens to clear her head, and in County collided with Gideon in the darkened corridor. "I was coming to find you," he said, his voice rough. "I cannot do this anymore. I cannot pretend indifference while you are so close and yet impossibly far. You must. Your family. Your duty." "Damn my duty." He pulled her into an empty sitting room, closing the door behind them. The only light came from the dying fire in the grate, painting everything in shades of amber and shadow. "I have spent my entire life doing what was expected. Inheriting at 23, managing an estate, supporting my mother and sisters, maintaining the family name. I have never asked for anything for myself, but I am asking now. I am asking for you. I have nothing to offer you, no fortune, no connections, no... You have everything I want, your strength, your intelligence, your courage, the way you laugh when you discover an error in the accounts, the way you bite your lip when you are concentrating, the way you look at me as if I am not an count but simply a man." His hands framed her face and his voice dropped to a whisper. "I am falling in love with you, Vivian Hartley. Tell me I have not lost my mind. Tell me you feel even a fraction of what I feel." "More than a fraction," she breathed. "So much more that it terrifies me." He kissed her then. And the world reduced to the press of his mouth against hers, the solid warmth of his body, the desperate tenderness of his hands in her hair. It was nothing like the chaste kisses she had shared with Thomas. This was fire and need, and the terrifying exhilaration of falling with no certainty of landing safely. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Gideon rested his forehead against hers. "I will speak to my mother tomorrow. I will end this charade with Lady Constance and make my intentions toward you clear. The scandal will be enormous. Let it be enormous. I have lived my entire life in fear of scandal, and where has it gotten me? Miserable and alone, contemplating a marriage of convenience to a woman I respect but do not love." He kissed her again, softer this time. "I choose you, I choose happiness. Let society say what it will." They parted reluctantly, Vivian returning to her room in a daze of joy and terror. She had just reached her door when a voice emerged from the shadows. "How touching." Vivian spun to find Cyrus Pritchard leaning against the wall, his expression a mask of malicious satisfaction. Her blood turned to ice. "What are you doing here?" "I am a guest of the Marquis of Thornbury. Lady Constance's father and I have certain business arrangements." He pushed away from the wall, moving closer with predatory grace. "Imagine my surprise when I discovered that the Count of Wrenford had invited his little widow to a house party. How very irregular. And now I find you sneaking through corridors in the middle of the night, your lips swollen from kissing. I wonder what the other guests would make of such behavior. You have no proof of anything. I have eyes, Mrs. Hartley, and I have a very loud voice. One word from me, and your reputation, such as it is, will be utterly destroyed. The Count's as well. His family will never forgive the scandal, and Lady Constance's father will withdraw his considerable political support. Wrenford needs that support for a bill he is sponsoring in Parliament. Did he mention that? No? How careless of him." Vivian forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. "What do you want?" "For you and your Count to abandon this foolish investigation. Destroy the evidence you have gathered. Forget about the missing money. In return, I will keep silent about your midnight assignation, and I will not pursue the matter of your cottage. You may keep your little sewing room and your dignity." His smile was a slash of cruelty. "Refuse, and I will ruin you both. I have nothing left to lose, Mrs. Hartley." "Do you?" He left her standing in the corridor, his threat hanging in the air like poison. Vivian made it back to her room before her legs gave out, and she sank onto the bed, mind racing. Pritchard was right about one thing: scandal would destroy everything. Gideon's political ambitions, his family's standing, her own ability to earn a living. No one would hire a seamstress who had been publicly exposed as an Count's mistress. But if they surrendered to Pritchard's blackmail, he would escape justice. The money he had stolen would never be recovered. And Gideon would be forced into a marriage with Lady Constance to salvage his reputation, while Vivian returned to her cottage to live with the memory of what might have been. She was still sitting there, paralyzed by impossible choices, when dawn began to lighten the sky. The next morning brought fresh disaster. Vivian woke to find a note slipped under her door, written in Pritchard's distinctive hand. "You have until this evening to decide. Choose wisely." She dressed mechanically and made her way to the breakfast room where the house party guests were gathering. The atmosphere was strangely charged, with clusters of people whispering behind fans and glancing in her direction. Lady Constance sat at the head of the table, her expression unreadable. Gideon was nowhere to be seen. The Dowager Countess appeared at Vivian's elbow. "My dear, I think you should come with me. There has been a development." She led Vivian to the library, where Gideon stood with his back to the door, shoulders rigid with tension. When he turned, his face was a mask of barely controlled fury. "Pritchard has struck first. He went to my mother last night and told her that you and I have been conducting an affair. He provided enough details to make the story credible and suggested that I have been using the investigation as a pretext to spend time with you. My mother is threatening to cut off my sister's allowances if I do not end our association immediately and propose to Lady Constance by week's end." Vivian felt the room spin. "Your sisters should not suffer for our actions." "Our actions?" Gideon crossed to her in 3 strides, gripping her shoulders. "We have done nothing wrong. We have worked together to expose a criminal. If we have also fallen in love, that is no one's business but our own. Your mother has made it her business, as has Pritchard." Vivian pulled free, needing distance to Thinkle County. "He came to me last night. He offered to keep silent about what he saw if we abandon the investigation." "Absolutely not. Gideon, listen to me. If we continue, the scandal will destroy your family. Your sisters will be unmarriageable. Your political career will end before it begins, and I will be branded a fortune-hunting widow who seduced an Count. I will lose my cottage, my business, everything I have worked to build. Then we will build something new together. With what? Love does not pay debts or feed families or restore reputations." She forced the words past the ache in her throat. "I will not be the reason you lose everything that matters. You are what matters." The door opened and Lady Constance entered, her expression grave. "Forgive the interruption, but I believe I may have a solution to this impossible situation." Both Gideon and Vivian stared at her. Lady Constance closed the door and leaned against it, her perfect composure cracking to reveal something surprisingly human beneath. "I do not love you, Gideon, I never have, and you do not love me. We have been pushed toward this match by families who care more about alliances than happiness." She looked at Vivian with something that might have been sympathy. "I have been watching you both this week. The way you look at each other when you think no one is observing, the way you come alive in each other's presence. That is what marriage should be, not the cold arrangement my parents envision. Constance, I do not understand. I am in love with someone else, a younger son with no title and modest prospects. My father will never approve. But if you were to publicly jilt me, Gideon, the scandal would be mine to bear. I could use my ruined reputation as leverage to force my father's hand. He would have to let me marry where I choose, as no other suitable match would have me." Gideon shook his head. "I cannot ask you to sacrifice yourself." "You are not asking. I am offering, but there is a condition." Lady Constance's expression hardened. "You must expose Pritchard, completely and publicly. My father has been doing business with that man, and I suspect those dealings are not entirely legal. If Pritchard falls, my father's association with him will be exposed. It will weaken his hold over me and give me the freedom I need." Vivian felt hope flare, dangerous and bright. Pritchard threatened to reveal our relationship if we continue the investigation. Then we must move faster than he can, strike before he has time to spread his poison. Lady Constance moved to the desk, pulling out paper and pen. I will write to the magistrate today requesting an urgent meeting. You will present your evidence. I will testify to my father's business dealings with Pritchard, which will add weight to your accusations. By tomorrow, Pritchard will be facing legal consequences, and his threats will be meaningless. The scandal will be enormous, but it will be the right kind of scandal. You will be the hero who exposed corruption, not the villain who broke a betrothal for selfish reasons. And Mrs. Hartley will be the brave woman who helped you, not a scheming mistress. Lady Constance smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. Sometimes, Gideon, the only way to win is to change the rules of the game entirely. If you are captivated by this tale of love defying all odds, please like this video. Your support helps us bring more sweeping historical romances to life. Chapter 4. The plan was set in motion with the kind of precision that would have impressed a military general. Lady Constance wrote to Sir Edmund Carstairs, the county magistrate, requesting his presence at Wrenford Hall the following afternoon on a matter of urgent legal importance. The Dowager Countess, once informed of the scheme, threw her considerable influence behind it, inviting several prominent members of the local gentry to witness what she described as a revelation of significant public interest. Gideon and Vivian spent the night organizing their evidence into an irrefutable narrative. Every falsified entry, every inflated bill, every missing pound was documented and cross-referenced. They worked side by side in the library, the intimacy of shared purpose now edged with desperate urgency. If this fails, Vivian said as the clock struck 3 in the morning, Pritchard will destroy us. It will not fail. Gideon's hand covered hers on the desk. We have the truth on our side. That has to count for something. But when dawn came, it brought a complication neither had anticipated. Vivian returned to her room to change clothes and found it ransacked. Every drawer had been pulled open, her belongings scattered across the floor, and the folder containing copies of their most damning evidence, the documents she had been keeping as insurance, was gone. She ran to find Gideon, her heart in her throat. Pritchard, he must have bribed a servant to search my room. He has taken the duplicate records. Gideon's face went white. Those documents included your notes on the original loan to your husband. Without them, we cannot prove that the amount was falsified. We still have the primary ledgers, which Pritchard will claim were altered by us to frame him. Your notes were dated and in your own hand. They provided independent verification. He slammed his fist against the desk. Damn him. He is always one step ahead. The Dowager Countess appeared in the doorway, her expression grim. There is more. Pritchard left the house party an hour ago. One of the footmen saw him departing in great haste. He is running. Then we have lost, Vivian said dully. Without the evidence and without Pritchard to confront, the magistrate will dismiss our claims as speculation. Not necessarily. Lady Constance entered behind the Dowager, and she was not alone. A young man accompanied her, handsome in an understated way, with kind eyes and ink-stained fingers. This is Mr. David Thornton. He is a solicitor's clerk in my father's employ. He is also the man I intend to marry. Mr. Thornton bowed nervously. My lord, Mrs. Hartley, Lady Constance has explained your situation. I believe I can help. I have been keeping records of my own regarding Mr. Pritchard's dealings with the Marquis. My employer has been pressuring me to falsify certain documents related to property transactions. I refused, but I kept copies of the original paperwork as protection. Some of those transactions involved the Wrenford estate. He produced a leather portfolio, setting it on the desk. Inside were dozens of documents, all meticulously organized. Gideon flipped through them, his expression shifting from despair to fierce hope. These show Pritchard acting as an intermediary in the sale of Wrenford timber to a London merchant. But the prices listed here are far below market value. The difference was pocketed by Pritchard and my employer, Mr. Thornton finished quietly. I estimate the fraud at N County £3,000 over 2 years. I have been waiting for an opportunity to expose it without losing my position. This seems to be that opportunity. Vivian wanted to weep with relief. This corroborates everything we found. It establishes a pattern of behavior. More than that, Gideon said, his voice tight with controlled excitement. It provides evidence that Pritchard had the means and motive to falsify the loan to your husband. If he was stealing thousands from timber sales, a few £100 skimmed from a loan would be trivial by comparison. The pieces were falling into place, but they were not yet safe. Pritchard was in the wind, and without him present to face the accusations, the legal case would be complicated. They needed to find him before he could disappear entirely, or worse, destroy additional evidence. It was the Dowager Countess who provided the final piece of the puzzle. Pritchard has a sister in the village, a widow named Mrs. Blackwood who runs a boarding house. If he is fleeing, he may have stopped there to collect money or belongings. It is worth investigating. Gideon was already moving toward the door. I will go immediately. Not alone, Vivian said, following him. If you confront him without witnesses, he will claim you attacked him or falsified evidence. I am coming with you. As am I, Lady Constance announced. This has become rather exciting, and I refuse to miss the conclusion. They made an unlikely party. An count, a widow, a lady, and a solicitor's clerk, all crammed into Gideon's carriage as it raced toward the village. The boarding house was a neat establishment on the edge of the main street, and Mrs. Blackwood answered their knock with obvious nervousness. Lord Wrenford, that is, how may I help you? Is your brother here, Mrs. Blackwood? The woman's face crumpled. He left not 20 minutes ago. Took the mail coach to London. He said he was in terrible trouble and that I was not to speak to anyone about his visit. She twisted her apron in her hands. What has Cyrus done? He has stolen a great deal of money and attempted to blackmail several people to cover his crimes, Gideon said bluntly. Did he leave anything here? Papers, belongings? He left a trunk. Said he would send for it once he was settled. Mrs. Blackwood looked between them, fear and resignation warring in her expression. I knew something was wrong. Cyrus always did have more ambition than sense. You may search his room if you wish. I want no part of whatever trouble he has brought to my door. The trunk, when they opened it, was a treasure trove of incriminating evidence. Pritchard had kept meticulous records of his thefts, perhaps as insurance against his own employers, or perhaps out of simple arrogance. There were ledgers showing the true amounts of various transactions, correspondence with merchants detailing kickback arrangements, and, most damning of all, a journal in which Pritchard had documented his schemes with chilling casualness. Vivian found the entry about Thomas's loan and read it aloud, her voice shaking. Arranged loan of £1,200 to T. Hartley. Documented as 2,000. Difference of 800 to be split with J. Morrison. Hartley is a fool and will never question the paperwork. If he defaults, the widow can be pressured to sell the cottage at below value. Profit potential significant. The casual cruelty of it, the reduction of her husband's desperation and her own suffering to a line item in a criminal's ledger, made her want to scream. But Gideon's hand found hers steady and warm, and she drew strength from the contact. We have him, Mr. Thornton said, carefully cataloguing each document. This is more than enough for the magistrate to issue a warrant. Pritchard will be arrested the moment he shows his face in London. They returned to Wrenford Hall in triumph, the trunk of evidence secured in the carriage. Sir Edmund Carstairs arrived that afternoon as planned, along with the assembled witnesses the Dowager Countess had invited. The presentation of evidence took 3 hours, with Gideon, Vivian, Mr. Thornton, and Lady Constance each providing testimony. By the end, the magistrate's expression had progressed from skepticism to shock to grim determination. This is one of the most comprehensive cases of fraud I have encountered, Sir Edmund said, closing the final ledger. Lord Wrenford, you and Mrs. Hartley have done a remarkable service. I will issue warrants immediately for Mr. Pritchard's arrest and for the Marquis of Thornbury to answer questions about his involvement. Lady Constance's father, who had been summoned to witness the proceedings, sat in stony silence. His political alliance with Gideon was Cull County over, but his power to enforce his daughter's unwanted betrothal had been shattered. When Lady Constance rose and announced that she would be marrying Mr. Thornton with or without her father's blessing, the Marquis could only nod in defeated acceptance. As the witnesses departed and the household began to settle after the dramatic afternoon, Gideon found Vivian in the library, staring at the now empty desk where they had spent so many hours. It is over, she said softly. Pritchard will face justice. Your estate will recover the stolen funds. My husband's debt is proven false. We have won. We have, Gideon agreed, but I find myself uncertain about what comes next. Vivian turned to face him, her heart aching with love and fear in equal measure. You are free now, free of Pritchard's threats, free of the arranged marriage. You can rebuild your reputation and find a bride worthy of your station. I have already found her. He crossed to her, taking both her hands in his. I know the obstacles remain, the difference in our stations, the scandal that will follow if an count marries a widow of no fortune. My family will be horrified. Society will gossip for years. But I have learned something these past months, Vivian. I have learned that a life lived in fear of scandal is no life at all. I love you. I want to build a future with you. Will you marry me? Vivian's eyes filled with tears. Your sister's prospects will survive. My grandmother has already promised to sponsor them, and her influence is considerable. My mother will come around eventually, and if society chooses to cut us, then we will create our own society of people who value substance over superficiality. You make it sound simple. It will not be simple. It will be difficult and occasionally painful and probably quite scandalous. But it will be ours, a life we choose, not one dictated by duty or expectation. He smiled, and the joy in his expression took her breath away. Marry me, Vivian Hartley. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that love is worth any price. She kissed him then, there in the library where they had first begun to unravel the mystery that brought them together. And when she pulled back, her answer was clear and certain. Yes. Chapter 5. The announcement of the Count of Wrenford's engagement to Mrs. Vivian Hartley sent shockwaves through polite society. Lady Whistledown, the notorious gossip chronicler, devoted an entire column to the scandal, describing it as the most shocking misalliance of the season, and speculating wildly about the circumstances that could have led an count to marry so far beneath his station. Gideon read the column aloud over breakfast, his tone mocking. She suggests you must have some secret hold over me, perhaps blackmail or witchcraft. I am particularly fond of the theory that you are secretly a French spy who seduced me for access to state secrets. Vivian, who was reviewing the menu for their upcoming wedding breakfast, laughed despite herself. I am terrible at keeping secrets, and I do not speak French. I would make a very poor spy. You are, however, excellent at seduction. He leaned over to kiss her temple, though I was a willing victim from the start. The weeks following their engagement had been a whirlwind of activity. Pritchard had been arrested in London, attempting to board a ship to the continent. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and he was currently awaiting trial. The Marquis of Thornbury, facing his own legal troubles, had withdrawn from public life. Lady Constance and Mr. Thornton had married quietly, and were reportedly very happy. Gideon's mother had indeed been horrified by the engagement, but the Dowager Countess had taken her daughter-in-law in hand with characteristic firmness. The boy is happy for the first time in his life, she had declared. If you cannot see the value in that, then you are a fool. Mrs. Hartley is intelligent, capable, and Kell County devoted to him. She will make an excellent countess, and I will hear no more complaints on the subject. Faced with the combined force of her mother-in-law's approval and her son's unwavering determination, the Countess had grudgingly accepted the match. Gideon's sisters, far from being scandalized, were delighted by the romance of it all and had embraced Vivian with genuine warmth. The wedding was planned for late summer, a small ceremony in the Wrenford chapel followed by a breakfast for close friends and family. Vivian had insisted on simplicity, uncomfortable with the idea of a grand society wedding that would only fuel more gossip. Gideon had agreed, caring only that the end result was a legal bond that would tie them together for life. But 2 days before the ceremony, a final complication arose. Vivian received a letter from a London solicitor informing her that Thomas's family was contesting the resolution of his debt. They claimed that as his widow, she had no legal standing to negotiate on behalf of his estate, and that they, as his blood relations, were entitled to any recovered funds. They want the £800 that Pritchard stole, Vivian said, her voice tight with anger. The money that was supposed to go to Thomas but was pocketed by a thief. They contributed nothing to his support during his life, but now they want to profit from his death. Gideon read the letter, his expression darkening. This is spite. They know you are about to marry and count, and they cannot bear the thought of you rising above your station. They want to cause trouble. Can they succeed? Not if I have anything to say about it. He was already reaching for paper and pen. I will write to my own solicitor. We will argue that the debt was fraudulent from the start, and that any recovered funds belong to the Wrenford estate, not to Thomas's family. You were never legally responsible for a debt that did not exist in the form claimed. The legal maneuvering took up the entire day before the wedding. Solicitors came and went. Arguments were made. Precedents were cited. In the end, it was the Dowager Countess who cut through the complexity with characteristic bluntness. Pay them, she told Gideon. Give Thomas Hartley's grasping relatives their £800 and be done with it. You are about to marry the woman you love. Do not let petty legal squabbles cast a shadow over your wedding day. The money means nothing. Your happiness means everything. Gideon looked at Vivian, who nodded slowly. She is right. Let them have it. I want no connection to Thomas's family, and I want no cloud hanging over our marriage. We have won everything that matters. Let them have their blood money. The payment was arranged, and Thomas's relatives withdrew their complaint with unseemly haste. Vivian felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The last tie to her old life had been severed. She was free to step into her new role without the burden of the past dragging behind her. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the late summer sun casting golden light through the chapel windows. Vivian wore a gown of ivory silk, simple but elegant, with her mother's piquants at her throat. She had no family to give her away, so the Dowager Countess performed the honor, walking her down the aisle with fierce pride. Gideon waited at the altar, resplendent in dark blue superfine, his grey eyes fixed on Vivian with an intensity that made her forget the handful of guests, the curious villagers peering through the windows, the weight of scandal and expectation. There was only him, only this moment, only the promise of a future built on love rather than duty. The vicar's words washed over her in a blur of ritual and tradition. She heard herself making vows, felt Gideon's hand warm and steady as he slipped a ring onto her finger. And then the vicar was pronouncing them man and wife, and Gideon was kissing her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. The breakfast that followed was a joyful affair. The Dowager Countess gave a toast that managed to be both moving and slightly scandalous. Lady Constance and Mr. Thornton attended, their own happiness evident in every glance they shared. Even Gideon's mother unbent enough to wish Vivian well, though her smile was still somewhat strained. As the afternoon wore on and the guests began to depart, Gideon pulled Vivian aside into the garden. They walked together through the rose arbor, the scent of flowers heavy in the warm air. "Are you happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "Deliriously, terrifyingly, completely." She leaned into him, marveling at the simple joy of being able to touch him freely, without fear of impropriety or scandal. "Are you?" "More than I knew it was possible to be." He stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands framing her face with infinite gentleness. "I came to your cottage to collect a debt, and I found something infinitely more valuable. I found you. I found the possibility of a life lived for love rather than obligation. You have given me a gift beyond price, Vivian. You gave me the same gift. You saw me as more than a poor widow to be pitied. You saw my strength, my worth. You made me believe I deserved happiness." She kissed him softly. "We saved each other. Then let us continue saving each other for the next 50 years. They stood together in the garden as the sun began to set, two people who had found each other against all odds and chosen love over every obstacle society could place in their path. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be gossip and social slights and moments of doubt, but they would face it together, bound by a love that had been tested and proven true. And in the end, that was the only debt that mattered, the debt of the heart, paid in full with every shared glance, every tender touch, every day spent building a life that was entirely, gloriously their own. This is the power of love that refuses to bow to convention. If you enjoyed this journey of courage and devotion, please subscribe to our channel so you never miss another tale of hearts that dare to defy the world. Let us continue to bring you stories that remind us all that true love is worth any price. Epilogue. 5 years had passed since that golden summer wedding, and Wrenford Hall had been transformed. Not in its physical structure. The Palladian facade remained as imposing as ever, but in its atmosphere. Where once there had been cold formality, now there was warmth. Where duty had reigned supreme, now there was laughter. Vivian, Countess of Wrenford, stood at the library window watching her husband play with their 3-year-old daughter in the garden below. Little Eleanor had Gideon's grey eyes and Vivian's dark hair, and she had inherited her father's stubborn determination along with her mother's quick mind. She was currently insisting that she could climb a tree that was Kell County far too large for her, while Gideon attempted to negotiate a compromise involving a smaller tree and his supervision. "She has him wrapped around her finger," the Dowager Countess observed from her chair by the fire. At 82 she remained as sharp as ever, though she now required a cane for walking. "Just as you do," Vivian smiled. "He is an excellent father, better than I dared hope. He is an excellent man. I knew it the moment he brought you here to work on those accounts. I saw the way he looked at you, even then. As if you were a puzzle he desperately wanted to solve." The Dowager's expression softened. "You have made him happy, my dear. That is no small accomplishment." The past 5 years had indeed been happy, though not without challenges. Society had been slow to accept the match, and there were still drawing rooms where Vivian was not welcome. But Gideon's unwavering support and the Dowager's fierce championing had gradually won over most of the local gentry. More importantly, Vivian had discovered that she did not particularly care what society thought. She had her husband, her daughter, her work managing the estate accounts, which she continued to do with great skill, and a circle of true friends who valued substance over status. Cyrus Pritchard had been tried, convicted and transported to Australia for his crimes. The £8,000 he had stolen had been largely recovered and used to improve conditions for the tenant farmers and fund a school in the village. The Marquess of Thornbury had avoided prosecution, but had been forced to resign his political positions in disgrace. His daughter, Lady Constance Thornton, had given birth to twin boys and was reportedly blissfully happy with her solicitor husband. Gideon's mother had eventually warmed to Vivian, particularly after Eleanor's birth. His sisters had both made excellent matches, one to a viscount, the other to a wealthy merchant, and credited Vivian's example with giving them the courage to marry for love rather than mere advantage. The library door opened, and Gideon entered carrying a mud-splattered Eleanor, who was chattering excitedly about the tree she had almost climbed. "Your daughter," he said to Vivian with mock severity, "is going to give me grey hair before I am 40. My daughter? She is entirely your child when she is being stubborn, and entirely yours when she is being brilliant." He set Eleanor down, and she immediately ran to her great-grandmother to describe her adventures. Gideon moved to Vivian's side, slipping an arm around her waist. "I have news. The magistrate sent word. They have recovered the last of the funds from Pritchard's accounts, an additional £1,200. That is wonderful. We can finally complete the repairs to the tenant cottages." "We can, but I thought we might also do something else with a portion of it." He turned her to face him, his expression serious. "I want to establish a fund to help widows in circumstances similar to yours. Women who are left with debts not of their making, who need time and support to establish themselves. We could provide small loans, business advice, perhaps even training in useful skills." Vivian felt tears prick her eyes. "That is a beautiful idea." "It is your idea, really. You showed me that widows are not helpless creatures to be pitied, but capable women who simply need a fair chance. I want to give other women what I tried to give you: time, respect, and the opportunity to build a life on their own terms. Even if some of them do not end up marrying counts," she teased. "Especially then. Though I must admit, marrying an count worked out rather well for you." She laughed and kissed him, there in the library where their story had truly begun. Eleanor made a disgusted sound. "Mama and Papa are being silly again," which made the Dowager Countess chuckle. That evening, after Eleanor had been put to bed and the household had settled into quiet, Vivian and Gideon returned to the library. It had become their habit to spend an hour there each night, sometimes working on estate business, sometimes simply talking, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence while they read. Tonight, Gideon pulled out the old ledgers from 5 years ago, the ones that had brought them together. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "The scandal, the social difficulties, the whispers that still follow you?" Vivian considered the question seriously. "There are moments when it is difficult, when I am snubbed at a social gathering, or when I see the way some people look at Eleanor, as if her mother's low birth has somehow tainted her. But then I come home to you, to this life we have built, and I cannot imagine having chosen differently. You, not for a single moment. You are the best decision I ever made. The bravest thing I ever did was walk away from duty and toward love." He opened one of the old ledgers, running his finger down a column of numbers. "I came to collect a debt and found everything I did not know I needed. How does one calculate the value of that? One does not. Some debts cannot be measured in pounds and shillings. They can only be paid in days and years, in shared joys and weathered sorrows, in the building of a life together. Then I am deeply in your debt, my love, and I intend to spend the rest of my life paying it." They sat together in the library as the fire burned low, two people who had gambled everything on love, and won more than they had ever dreamed possible. Outside, the summer night was soft with the promise of tomorrow. Inside, in the warmth and light, they had already found everything that mattered. The debt had been paid in full, and the interest, compounded daily in love and laughter and shared purpose, would continue to grow for all the years to come. In the end, this is a story about courage, the courage to look beyond society's rigid expectations and see the person standing before you. Gideon and Vivian's love was not built on grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but on the quiet, steady work of two people choosing each other every single day, despite every obstacle placed in their path. Their story reminds us that true love requires bravery. It asks us to risk comfort, status, and security for something far more valuable, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and genuine affection. In a world that often values appearance over substance and duty over desire, they dared to believe that happiness was not selfish, but essential. What debts do we carry that prevent us from claiming our own happiness? What expectations bind us to lives we never chose? And do we have the courage, like Vivian and Gideon, to pay the price for authentic love, knowing that price, however steep, is nothing compared to the cost of a life lived in quiet desperation? Our channel is filled with stories of hearts that refuse to surrender, of love that transforms everything it touches. Each tale reminds us that we are capable of extraordinary courage when we fight for what truly matters. What did you think of Vivian and Gideon's journey? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. Until our next story, may you find the courage to follow your heart.